The day Sharon Patterson handed me that citation for operating an unapproved commercial enterprise in my own driveway, I knew my quiet life in Meadowbrook, Pennsylvania, was about to get complicated. I had been bent over Mrs. Henderson's portable generator, checking the oil levels and replacing a worn spark plug, when Sharon's white Lexus pulled up to my curb. She stepped out wearing her trademark blazer and pearl necklace, clutching a leather folder like it was the Constitution itself. My name is Frank Norris, and I had been running my generator maintenance business from my home for 3 years without a single complaint from anyone who actually mattered. "Mr. Norris," Sharon said, her voice dripping with false politeness, "I'm afraid we have a situation that needs immediate attention." I wiped my hands on a rag and stood up. Mrs. Henderson, a sweet 70-year-old widow who lived 2 streets over, looked concerned. "What kind of situation?" Sharon opened her folder with a flourish. "According to Section 7.3 of the Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association bylaws, no resident may operate a commercial business from their property without explicit written approval from the HOA board. Your generator maintenance operation constitutes a clear violation." "I submitted an application 8 months ago," I said, keeping my voice level. "I never heard back." "The board reviewed your application and denied it," Sharon replied, handing me a printed citation. "You should have received notification." "I never got any notification." "That's not the HOA's problem. Ignorance of our decision doesn't excuse continued violations." She glanced at Mrs. Henderson's generator with obvious distaste. "You have 72 hours to cease all business operations or face daily fines of $500. Mrs. Henderson gasped. "But Frank is the only person in town who services generators properly. When that storm knocked out power last month, he kept half the neighborhood running." Sharon's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I'm sure there are licensed businesses in Pittsburgh that can handle your needs, Mrs. Henderson. Good day." She climbed back into her Lexus and drove off, leaving me standing there with a piece of paper that could destroy everything I had built. I finished Mrs. Henderson's generator in silence, my mind racing. The business wasn't just income, it was my purpose after leaving the Army. I had spent 20 years as a generator technician, keeping power flowing at bases across the world. When I retired and moved to Meadowbrook 3 years ago, I thought I had found the perfect place to settle down. The town sat in a valley 40 miles northeast of Pittsburgh, population 8,000, with a main street full of small businesses and neighborhoods that still felt like communities. Then, Meadowbrook Hills was built on the eastern edge of town. 200 homes in a planned development with manicured lawns, strict architectural guidelines, and an HOA board that seemed to exist solely to make life difficult. I had bought my house before really understanding what I was getting into. The neighborhood was nice enough, but Sharon Patterson had become HOA president 2 years ago, and things had changed fast. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table reviewing my records. I had serviced generators for over 60 clients in the past year. Homeowners, small businesses, the fire department, even the elementary school. Meadowbrook sat in a region prone to severe storms, and power outages were common. After a derecho had devastated parts of Pennsylvania 3 years ago, people had gotten smart about backup power. My business had grown through word of mouth and honest work. My phone rang. It was Tom Garcia, who owned Garcia's Hardware on Main Street. "Frank, I just heard what happened. Sharon came into the store crowing about shutting you down. News travels fast. This town is too small for secrets. Listen, you can't let her do this. Do you know how many businesses depend on you? The pharmacy needs their backup systems maintained. The grocery store, the medical clinic, The traffic lights at the Highway 22 intersection all have generators you service. I know, Tom. I'm trying to figure out my options. Come to the town council meeting tomorrow night, 7 o'clock at the community center. If Sharon wants to play hardball, we'll show her that the town stands with you. I thanked him and hung up, feeling slightly better. But I also knew Sharon well enough to know she wouldn't back down easily. The woman collected grievances like other people collected stamps. The next morning, I drove to the county courthouse in Butler to review HOA regulations and zoning laws. The clerk, a patient woman named Deanne, helped me pull up the relevant documents. Pennsylvania law gave HOAs significant power, but there were limits. Businesses operated from home addresses fell into a gray area, especially service businesses that didn't generate excessive traffic or noise. Your best bet is proving the business doesn't impact the neighborhood negatively, Deanne explained. If you mostly work on site at client locations and only do minor work at home, you might have a case. What about the denial of my application? I never received notice. That could be an issue. HOAs are required to notify residents in writing of board decisions. Do you have proof of your original application? I showed her the certified mail receipt from 8 months ago. She nodded approvingly. Keep that safe. If they claim they sent denial notification, they need to prove it. Burden of proof is on them. Armed with this information, I headed back to Meadowbrook. On the way, my phone rang 3 times. First, Dr. Sarah Chen from the medical clinic needed to schedule her quarterly generator inspection. Then Bill Morrison from Morrison's Pharmacy wanted to move up his maintenance appointment. Finally, Fire Chief Dave Richards called. "Frank, I heard about Sharon's citation. This is ridiculous. Our backup generator at the station is due for service next week. You're the only one I trust with it." "I'll be there, Chief. Sharon can write all the citations she wants." "Damn right. And Frank, I'll be at that town council meeting tomorrow, so will most of my crew." By the time the town council meeting rolled around the next evening, I was exhausted but determined. I arrived at the community center to find the parking lot nearly full. Inside, folding chairs had been set up for maybe 50 people, but at least twice that many had shown up. People lined the walls and spilled into the hallway. Tom Garcia waved me over to a seat he had saved in the front row. "Half the town is here, Frank. Word got out that Sharon was trying to shut you down." The town council consisted of 5 members, led by Mayor Patricia Gomez, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who had run a successful construction company before entering politics. She called the meeting to order and worked through the usual agenda items before reaching public comments. Sharon stood up immediately, still wearing her blazer and pearls. "Madam Mayor, I'm here representing the Meadowbrook Hills HOA. We have a serious issue with illegal business operations in our neighborhood. Mr. Frank Norris has been running an unlicensed commercial enterprise from his residence in clear violation of our bylaws." "The business isn't unlicensed," I said, unable to help myself. "I have all required state certifications and insurance." Sharon's face flushed. "Licensed or not, it violates HOA regulations. We have standards to maintain property values and quality of life." Mayor Gomez held up a hand. "Mr. Norris, would you like to respond?" I stood up, my hands slightly shaky. Public speaking had never been my strong suit. I submitted an application to the HOA board 8 months ago requesting approval to operate my generator maintenance business from my home. I never received a response. Then yesterday, Mrs. Patterson served me with a citation claiming the board denied my application, but I have no record of receiving any denial notice. "The notice was sent," Sharon insisted. "Then you should have proof," the mayor said mildly. Certified mail receipts, perhaps? Sharon's jaw tightened. I'll have to check our records. Fire Chief Richard stood up. Madam Mayor, if I may speak, Frank Norris maintains the emergency generator at our fire station. He also services generators at the police station, the elementary school, the middle school, the medical clinic, the pharmacy, and at least 15 businesses on Main Street. When we lost power for 5 days after that ice storm in January, Frank worked around the clock keeping critical systems running. This town needs him. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Dr. Chen stood next. Frank maintains the backup power system that keeps medications refrigerated and our medical equipment operational. Without him, we would have lost thousands of dollars in inventory during recent outages. One by one, people stood to share their stories. Mrs. Henderson talked about being an elderly woman living alone, who depended on her generator for her oxygen concentrator during outages. Tom Garcia explained how Frank had prevented tens of thousands of dollars in losses at the hardware store by keeping the refrigeration units running during a summer blackout. Even Principal Linda Martinez from Meadowbrook Elementary spoke about the importance of reliable backup power for the school. Sharon tried to interrupt several times, but Mayor Gomez kept her quiet. Finally, when everyone had spoken, the mayor turned to Sharon. Mrs. Patterson, I appreciate that the HOA has rules to follow. However, this council has a responsibility to the entire town, not just one neighborhood. Mr. Norris provides an essential service. I'm going to recommend that you and the HOA board reconsider this matter. The HOA operates independently of the town council, Sharon said stiffly. Our bylaws are legally binding. They are, the mayor agreed. But I would hate to see this become a legal battle, especially since Mr. Norris appears to have grounds to challenge the citation based on improper notification procedures. Sharon's face went from flushed to pale. She clearly hadn't expected the mayor to know about that particular detail. I'll bring this to the board, she said finally, then sat down with a thump. The meeting continued for another hour, but I barely heard any of it. My mind was racing with possibilities and concerns. When it finally adjourned, dozens of people came up to shake my hand and offer support. It felt overwhelming and humbling at the same time. As I was leaving, Mayor Gomez caught up with me. Mr. Norris, walk with me for a moment. We stepped outside into the cool evening air. She pulled out a business card and handed it to me. This is my attorney, Rebecca Zimmerman. She specializes in HOA disputes. I think you should give her a call. I appreciate that, but I'm not sure I can afford a legal battle right now. Rebecca does some pro bono work, especially for cases that affect the community. At least talk to her, and Frank, don't stop working. If Sharon starts assessing fines, document everything. Save every communication, every receipt, every work order. If this goes to court, you'll need a paper trail. I thanked her and drove home, feeling cautiously optimistic. But that optimism faded 3 days later when I found another notice on my door. This one informed me that I had failed to comply with the cease and desist order and was now being fined $500 per day, effective immediately. Additionally, the HOA was placing a lien on my property for unpaid fines. I called Rebecca Zimmerman that afternoon. Her secretary scheduled an appointment for the next morning. That night, I lay awake doing math. $500 a day was $15,000 a month. I had savings, but not enough to sustain that kind of hit for long. And a lien on my property meant I couldn't sell or refinance without paying off the HOA first. Rebecca's office was in downtown Butler, in a brick building that had probably been there since the 1920s. She was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with sharp eyes and a firm handshake. "Tell me everything," she said, pulling out a legal pad. I walked her through the entire situation, showing her every document I had. The original application submission, the certified mail receipt, the citation, the second notice about fines. She took notes and asked pointed questions. "The improper notification is our strongest argument," she said finally. Pennsylvania law requires HOAs to provide written notice of board decisions within 30 days. Did you attend any HOA meetings where your application might have been discussed? I didn't know there were meetings until after I got the citation. Sharon never announced them. Also, a violation. HOA meetings are supposed to be announced to all residents. She made another note. "Tell me about the business itself. Do you conduct repairs at your home?" Minor work sometimes. "Oil changes, spark plug replacements, basic troubleshooting. Anything major I do on site at the client's location." "How many vehicles do you have?" "Just my truck." "Do clients come to your house?" "No, I go to them." "Perfect. We can argue this is a service business, not a commercial operation that impacts the neighborhood. The key distinction is that you're not generating traffic or operating a storefront." She leaned back in her chair. "Here's what we're going to do. First, I'm going to send a letter to the HOA board demanding they provide proof of notification regarding your application denial. Second, I'm going to request a hearing before the board to appeal the citation. Third, I'm going to file a complaint with the State Attorney General's office regarding the HOA's violation of notification procedures. How much is this going to cost me? Let's start with the letter and hearing request. I'll bill you for 5 hours at a reduced rate, call it $750 total. After that, we'll see where we stand. Mayor Gomez told me about your work in the community. I'm not going to let Sharon Patterson railroad you over a power trip." I left her office feeling better than I had in days, but the relief was short-lived. That afternoon, I got a call from Mrs. Henderson in tears. "Frank, Sharon came to my house. She said if I hire you again, the HOA will fine me too. She said I'm encouraging illegal business activity." "Mrs. Henderson, you don't live in Meadowbrook Hills. The HOA has no authority over you." "I know, but she scared me. She was so aggressive, Frank, standing on my porch and threatening me. Something cold settled in my chest. Sharon had crossed a line. Did anyone else see or hear this?" My neighbor Carol was in her yard. She heard everything. Would Carol be willing to give a statement about what she heard? "I think so. Frank, what's happening? Why is Sharon doing this?" That was the question, wasn't it? I had been assuming this was just about HOA rules, but the more Sharon escalated, the more it felt personal. After I hung up with Mrs. Henderson, I started digging into Sharon's background. It turned out Sharon Patterson had moved to Meadowbrook 5 years ago after a messy divorce in Ohio. She had immediately inserted herself into the HOA, running for the board in her first year and becoming president in her third. Under her leadership, the number of citations and fines had tripled. She had forced 3 families to sell their homes over violations ranging from unapproved fence colors to grass that was allegedly too long. But more interesting was what I found when I searched for her name in the Pennsylvania Business Registry. 2 years ago, Sharon had registered a business called Premium Property Services LLC. The business license was still active, and the registered address was her home in Meadowbrook Hills. I called Rebecca immediately. "Sharon has her own business operating from her home. Isn't that hypocritical?" "It's more than hypocritical," Rebecca said. "It's potentially a conflict of interest. What kind of business?" "Property management and consulting, according to the state registry." "Does she actually operate it?" "I don't know. But if she does, she's violating the same rules she's trying to enforce against me. Let me look into this. Frank, this could change everything." Over the next week, things accelerated rapidly. Rebecca sent her letter to the HOA board, and instead of responding professionally, Sharon fired back with a personal attack letter claiming I was a troublemaker trying to circumvent proper procedures. Then Rebecca discovered that not only did Sharon operate her business from home, she had multiple clients and had even held meetings at her residence, which was definitely prohibited under the same HOA bylaws she was using against me. Rebecca filed a formal complaint with the HOA board, pointing out the double standard. Sharon's response was to schedule an emergency HOA board meeting to discuss problematic residents and legal challenges to the board's authority. The meeting was set for a Thursday evening. I showed up with Rebecca, along with Tom Garcia, Fire Chief Richards, Dr. Chen, and about 20 other supporters. The meeting was held in the Meadowbrook Hills Clubhouse, a fancy building with leather furniture and oil paintings on the walls. Sharon sat at the head of a long table with 4 other board members: Vice President Mark Sullivan, Treasurer Janet Reeves, Secretary Donna Mitchell, and Member-at-Large Barry Cole. Sharon called the meeting to order with obvious reluctance. "We have several items on the agenda tonight, but first we need to address the matter of Mr. Norris and his attorney's aggressive correspondence to this board." Rebecca stood up smoothly. "Madam President, my correspondence has been entirely professional. I simply requested proof that my client was properly notified of the board's decision regarding his business application, as required by Pennsylvania law." "The notice was sent," Sharon insisted. "Then provide the proof. A certified mail receipt, a tracking number, anything that shows the notice was actually delivered." Sharon shuffled papers in front of her. The other board members looked uncomfortable. Finally, Janet Reeves cleared her throat. "Sharon, do we have that documentation? It should be in the files." "Should be isn't the same as is," Rebecca said. "Pennsylvania HOA regulations are clear. If you cannot prove notification was provided, the denial of Mr. Norris's application is invalid." Barry Cole spoke up for the first time. "I've been on this board for 4 years. I don't remember voting on Mr. Norris's application." Sharon's face went rigid. "It was discussed at a board meeting last fall." "I don't recall that," Donna Mitchell said slowly. "Janet, do you remember?" The treasurer shook her head. "I don't." "Sharon, did we actually vote on this?" The room went silent. Sharon opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. "The president has discretion to make certain decisions without a full board vote on minor administrative matters. Approving or denying a business application is not a minor administrative matter," Rebecca said. "According to your own bylaws, all business applications require a majority board vote. Did that vote happen?" "I don't appreciate being interrogated in my own community," Sharon snapped. "With all due respect, this is the community's HOA, not yours personally," Mark Sullivan said. He was a lawyer himself, and I could see him doing the mental math on liability. "Sharon, if we denied Mr. Norris's application without a board vote, we're on shaky legal ground. Not to mention the fact that you operate your own business from your home," Rebecca added. "Premium Property Services LLC. Should we discuss that?" The color drained from Sharon's face. The other board members turned to stare at her. "That's different," she said weakly. "How is it different?" I asked. It was the first time I had spoken since arriving. "You have a registered business. You meet with clients at your home. You conduct commercial activities in the neighborhood. The only difference I can see is that you're the one doing it." Janet Reeves pulled out her phone and started typing. "Sharon, is this true? You have a business operating from your home while you're citing residents for the same thing. I provide consulting services occasionally. It's not a full-time operation." "Neither is mine," I said. I do most of my work on site at client locations. But you're still trying to shut me down while giving yourself a pass. The meeting devolved into chaos. Board members argued with Sharon. Residents shouted questions. Rebecca calmly took notes. Finally, Mark Sullivan called for order. "This meeting is a disaster," he said bluntly. "I move that we table all discussion of Mr. Norris's business until we can get our own house in order. We need to review how his application was handled, verify whether proper procedures were followed, and address the apparent double standard regarding the president's own business activities." "Second," said Barry Cole immediately. Sharon looked like she wanted to argue, but she was outnumbered. The motion passed 4-1, with only Sharon voting against it. As the meeting adjourned, she stormed out of the clubhouse without speaking to anyone. I thought that might be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 days later, I arrived home from servicing the fire station's generator to find my front yard decorated with official-looking signs. "Code violation," they proclaimed in large red letters. "Illegal business operation." Someone had placed a dozen of them around my property. I was pulling them out of the ground when my neighbor Ed walked over. "Frank, I saw Sharon putting those up about an hour ago. She had a whole stack of them in her car. Did you get pictures?" "Better. I got video." He pulled out his phone and showed me footage of Sharon methodically hammering signs into my lawn, her face set in grim determination. I called Rebecca. "Sharon is harassing me now. She put signs all over my yard." "That's property damage and harassment. File a police report immediately. And send me that video." The Meadowbrook police were professional and sympathetic. Officer Mike Torres took my statement and photos of the signs. "This is pretty clearly harassment, Mr. Norris. I'll have a talk with Mrs. Patterson." "I'd rather you document everything and let my attorney handle it." Smart move. "For what it's worth, my dad's generator kept running during that ice storm because of your maintenance. The whole department appreciates what you do." That evening, Rebecca called with news. "Frank, I've been digging deeper into Sharon's business dealings. Premium Property Services has been operating for 2 years, and she's listed as the sole proprietor. I pulled her tax returns as part of the discovery process, and she's been reporting income from it. Tens of thousands of dollars a year. So she's been running a business from her home while being HOA president and enforcing rules against everyone else." "Exactly, but it gets better. I also found 3 formal complaints against the HOA filed with the state attorney general's office in the past year. 2 from residents who were forced to sell their homes over disputed violations, and 1 from a family who claimed Sharon was using the HOA to harass them over a personal dispute." "What happened with those complaints?" "They're still under investigation. But this adds to a pattern of abuse of authority. I think we have grounds not just to fight your citation, but to challenge Sharon's position as HOA president." "I just want to work, Rebecca. I don't want to become some crusader against the HOA. I understand. But sometimes you have to fight the bigger battle to win the small one. Sharon isn't going to stop. She's dug in now, and her ego is involved. The only way to protect yourself and your business is to remove her from power." I spent that night thinking about what Rebecca had said. I hadn't asked for any of this. I just wanted to maintain generators and help people. But Sharon had made it personal, and her harassment was affecting not just me but my clients. Mrs. Henderson was afraid to call me. Tom Garcia had mentioned other business owners were worried about being targeted by the HOA if they supported me too vocally. The next morning, I made my decision. I called Rebecca and told her to move forward with everything. If we were going to fight, we would fight properly. Rebecca filed a formal complaint with the Pennsylvania Attorney General's office outlining Sharon's pattern of selective enforcement. her operation of a business in violation of the bylaws she was enforcing against others, and her harassment campaign against me. She also requested an emergency hearing with the HOA board to address Sharon's conduct. Sharon's response was to accelerate her campaign against me. She sent letters to all my clients warning them that they could be held liable for supporting illegal business activities. She contacted the state licensing board claiming I was operating without proper credentials, which was easily disproved, but still required hours of my time to address. She even tried to get my business insurance canceled by filing false complaints with my insurer. Each action just gave Rebecca more ammunition. We documented everything, building a case that Sharon was abusing her position for personal vendetta. Other residents of Meadowbrook Hills started coming forward with their own stories of Sharon's behavior. A family whose swing set was deemed too colorful and forced to be removed. A couple who were fined for parking their RV in their driveway for more than 24 hours, even though they were actively packing for a trip. A man who was cited for having decorative rocks in his yard that were allegedly the wrong size. The picture that emerged was of a HOA president who ruled through fear and arbitrary enforcement of rules. And through it all, she had been operating her own business in violation of the same bylaws. The emergency HOA board hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks after the initial confrontation. In that time, tensions in Meadowbrook Hills reached a boiling point. Residents split into factions, some supporting Sharon out of fear or loyalty, others quietly supporting me. The local newspaper ran a story about the dispute, which brought regional attention. A Pittsburgh TV station even sent a reporter out to interview me. "This isn't about one person's business," I told the reporter, standing in front of my neat, well-maintained home. "It's about fairness and whether HOA boards can selectively enforce rules based on personal preferences. I follow the law. I serve my community. And I deserve the same standards applied to everyone else." The story aired on the evening news, and suddenly my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Other residents from across Pennsylvania dealing with overzealous HOAs reached out. A state legislator called to say he was interested in reforming HOA regulations based on cases like mine. The attention was overwhelming and unwelcome. I just wanted to get back to work. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I kept running through scenarios in my head. What if the board sided with Sharon despite everything? What if the other board members were too afraid to stand up to her? What if I lost my home over this? Rebecca had warned me that even if we won at the HOA level, Sharon might try to drag things out through legal challenges. I could be looking at months or even years of uncertainty. My savings were dwindling from legal fees and lost business. Several clients had stopped calling, either scared off by Sharon's threats or just not wanting to be involved in the drama. The hearing was held in the same clubhouse as before, but this time it was packed. Every seat was filled and people stood along the walls. The board sat at their table, but the dynamic had clearly shifted. Mark Sullivan had taken over as acting chairman, with Sharon sitting stiffly at the end of the table rather than in her usual position of authority. "This hearing is called to order," Mark announced. "We're here to address multiple complaints regarding HOA governance and the specific matter of Mr. Frank Norris's business operation. Mrs. Patterson, you've been invited to present your position first." Sharon stood, clutching a folder. Her hands were shaking slightly. "This board has a duty to enforce our bylaws fairly and consistently. Mr. Norris submitted an application to operate a business from his home, and that application was reviewed and denied based on legitimate concerns about commercial activity in a residential neighborhood. Was there a formal board vote on that denial? Mark asked. The matter was discussed. That's not what I asked. Was there a vote? Sharon's jaw tightened. As president, I have the authority to make administrative decisions. No, you don't, Janet Reeves said. I've reviewed the bylaws. Business applications require a majority board vote. There's no exception for presidential discretion. I acted in the best interest of the community. You acted unilaterally, Barry Cole said, and you failed to provide proper notification to Mr. Norris. And now we've discovered you've been operating your own business from your home for the past 2 years. How do you explain that? My consulting work is minimal and doesn't impact the neighborhood. Neither does mine, I said, but you're trying to destroy my livelihood over it. Rebecca stood and addressed the board. Members of the board, I've provided you with extensive documentation showing a pattern of selective enforcement, abuse of authority, and personal harassment by Mrs. Patterson. She has violated the same bylaws she's attempting to enforce against my client. She has failed to follow proper procedures in multiple instances, and she has used her position to intimidate residents and business owners throughout this community. This isn't just about Mr. Norris. This is about whether this HOA will be run according to its own rules or according to the whims of one person. She laid out the evidence methodically. The lack of proper notification, the missing board vote, Sharon's own business operation. The harassment campaign, complete with Ed's video of Sharon planting signs in my yard. The threatening visits to my clients. The false complaints to licensing boards and insurance companies. With each point, Sharon's face grew paler. The other board members looked increasingly uncomfortable and angry. When Rebecca finished, Mark Sullivan turned to Sharon. Mrs. Patterson, do you have any response to these allegations? This is a witch hunt, Sharon said. Mr. Norris and his attorney are trying to intimidate this board into letting him do whatever he wants. No, Donna Mitchell said quietly. They're asking us to follow our own rules, and they're right. Sharon, I've served on this board with you for 2 years, and I've watched you become increasingly hostile and arbitrary in your enforcement. This has to stop. I move that we immediately rescind all citations and fines against Mr. Norris, Mark said. His business application was never properly denied, which means it should be considered approved by default. Further, I move that we approve his application formally, effective immediately. Second, said Janet. All in favor, 4 hands went up. Sharon sat frozen, her hand remaining on the table. Motion carries, Mark said. Mr. Norris, your business is approved. All fines are canceled and the lien on your property will be removed within 48 hours. Relief washed over me so intensely I felt dizzy. But Mark wasn't done. I also move that we initiate proceedings to remove Sharon Patterson from her position as HOA president, based on abuse of authority, failure to follow proper procedures, and conduct unbecoming of a board member. Sharon shot to her feet. You can't do this. Actually, we can, Barry Cole said. It's in the bylaws. A 2/3 vote of the board can remove an officer for cause, and you've given us plenty of cause. The vote was 4-1, with Sharon voting against her own removal. As acting chairman, Mark informed her that she had 30 days to vacate her position and that the board would be conducting a full audit of all her decisions as president. Sharon grabbed her folder and purse. You'll regret this, she hissed. All of you. Then she stormed out of the clubhouse. The room erupted in applause. People crowded around to shake my hand and congratulate me. Tom Garcia pulled me into a bear hug. Fire Chief Richards clapped me on the shoulder so hard I stumbled. Dr. Chen had tears in her eyes. Thank God, Mrs. Henderson said, gripping my hands. Now I can stop worrying about my generator. Rebecca smiled tiredly. We did it, though I doubt Sharon is going to go quietly. She was right. Over the next 2 weeks, Sharon tried everything to reverse the board's decision. She hired her own attorney and threatened to sue the HOA. She sent angry emails to all residents claiming she was the victim of a conspiracy. She even tried to call an emergency meeting to override the board's vote, but the bylaws didn't allow for that. When none of that worked, Sharon did something unexpected. She called the local building inspector's office and claimed my home workshop wasn't up to code. The inspector, a weary man named Doug, came out to check. I don't see any violations, he told me after a thorough inspection. Your workshop is clean, properly ventilated, and you're not doing anything that requires special permitting. Whoever called this in was wasting everyone's time. It was Sharon Patterson, wasn't it? Doug sighed. I can't confirm that, but let's just say this isn't the first complaint I've gotten from that particular address. The woman has called in code violations on half the neighborhood. Most of them are bogus. Can you do anything about false reports? If it continues, we can look at filing charges for misuse of municipal resources. But that's a last resort. Sharon's harassment continued. She contested the removal of the lien on my property, forcing Rebecca to file additional paperwork. She sent letters to the state attorney general's office claiming the HOA board had acted illegally. She even posted negative reviews of my business online, claiming I did shoddy work and overcharged customers. That last one actually backfired. Within days, dozens of my satisfied clients posted their own reviews praising my work. The fire department left a glowing review. Dr. Chen wrote a detailed testimonial about my professionalism and expertise. Tom Garcia organized a campaign where Main Street business owners all posted positive reviews on the same day. Sharon's negative review was buried under an avalanche of genuine support. 4 weeks after her removal as HOA president, Sharon's attacks suddenly stopped. I was relieved but suspicious. People like Sharon didn't just give up. I found out why when Rebecca called with news. Frank, you're not going to believe this. The Attorney General's office has been investigating Sharon for fraud. What kind of fraud? Remember those HOA fines she was assessing? It turns out she was inflating the amounts and pocketing the difference. The HOA was supposed to get $500 a day from you, but Sharon was telling people they owed more and keeping the excess. She did it to multiple residents over the past 2 years. We're talking about tens of thousands of dollars. I felt sick. So she wasn't just power hungry, she was stealing. Yes, and there's more. Some of the families she forced to sell their homes, Sharon used her property consulting business to help facilitate the sales. She was creating violations to force people out, then profiting from their departures. That's evil. It's also multiple felonies. The Attorney General's office has enough evidence to file charges. I expect an arrest warrant within the week. Sharon Patterson was arrested on a Tuesday morning. The charges included fraud, embezzlement, extortion, and abuse of public trust. The local news covered it extensively, with reporters camped out in front of Sharon's house. She was released on bail but ordered to have no contact with HOA board members or residents she had previously cited. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 8 weeks later. I attended along with several other former targets of Sharon's enforcement campaigns. She sat at the defense table looking smaller somehow, her blazer and pearls replaced with a simple blouse. Her attorney tried to argue that the charges were overblown, that Sharon had simply made bookkeeping errors and exercised her authority as HOA president in good faith. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Amanda Foster, systematically destroyed that argument. She presented bank records showing Sharon had deposited HOA fine money into personal accounts. She showed emails where Sharon had coordinated with real estate agents to profit from forced home sales. She presented testimony from residents who had been targeted and harassed. When it was my turn to testify, I kept it factual. I described Sharon's campaign against my business, her harassment of my clients, her false complaints to licensing boards and inspectors. I showed the video of her planting signs in my yard. I presented the threatening letters she had sent. "Mr. Norris," the prosecutor asked, "in your opinion, was Mrs. Patterson acting in good faith to enforce HOA rules?" "No," I said. "She was using the HOA as a weapon to control people and make money. When I challenged her authority, she tried to destroy my business and my reputation. This was never about rules. It was about power and profit." The judge bound Sharon over for trial on all counts. Her attorney requested bail be continued, but the prosecutor argued that Sharon had demonstrated a pattern of harassment and might be a danger to the witnesses testifying against her. The judge compromised by maintaining bail but adding strict conditions, including electronic monitoring and a restraining order preventing Sharon from entering Meadowbrook Hills except to access her own home. 3 months later, Sharon accepted a plea deal. She pled guilty to fraud and embezzlement charges in exchange for dropping the extortion and abuse of trust counts. She was sentenced to 18 months in county jail, followed by 3 years of probation. She was also ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA and all affected residents, which totaled over $80,000. The Meadowbrook Hills HOA held an election to fill Sharon's vacant seat. A retired teacher named Grace Morton won and immediately began implementing reforms. The board revised the bylaws to add oversight and transparency requirements. They created an appeals process for contested violations. They established clear guidelines for business applications and other administrative decisions. My business not only survived but thrived. The publicity from the case brought me new clients from neighboring towns. I hired an assistant, a young veteran named Kyle who had just left the Marines and needed work. We expanded services to include not just maintenance but installation and consulting. Mrs. Henderson's generator ran perfectly through the next 3 storms. The fire station never missed a beat. Main Street businesses knew their backup power was reliable. And I finally felt like I belonged in Meadowbrook, not despite the HOA but as part of a community that had stood up for what was right. 6 months after Sharon's sentencing, I was working on a generator at the elementary school when Principal Martinez came out to talk to me. "Frank, the PTA wants to give you an award at the spring assembly, Community Service Recognition. Would you be willing to accept it?" "That's not necessary," I said, embarrassed. "It absolutely is. You fought for this community when it would have been easier to just give up and move away. You showed the kids and everyone else that standing up for what's right matters." The assembly was packed with students, teachers, and parents. When Principal Martinez called my name, I walked to the front of the gymnasium feeling awkward in the dress shirt and tie Rebecca had insisted I wear. The kids applauded, and several of them were holding signs they had made. "Thank you, Mr. Norris. Generator hero. Frank fixes everything." I accepted the plaque and said a few words about service and community. As I looked out at the faces in the crowd, I saw Tom Garcia and Dr. Chen, Fire Chief Richards and Mrs. Henderson, Ed from next door, and dozens of others who had supported me through the fight with Sharon. Rebecca was there too, sitting in the back row with her own kids. She caught my eye and nodded, a small smile on her face. We had won more than a legal battle. We had proved that communities could stand up to bullies and tyrants, even when they hid behind rules and regulations. That evening, I sat on my front porch with a beer, watching the sun set over Meadowbrook. My truck was parked in the driveway, my workshop hummed quietly in the garage, and tomorrow I had a full schedule of generator maintenance appointments. Everything Sharon had tried to take from me was not only restored but stronger than before. Kyle came out and joined me, handing me another beer. "Boss, we got 3 new client requests today. A church in Butler, a nursing home in Saxonburg, and some big estate up near Slippery Rock. We'll need to check our schedule. I don't want to overextend. Already on it. I'm learning your system." He paused. "Hey, Frank. Thanks for giving me this shot. After I got out, I wasn't sure what I was going to do. This work, it matters. People depend on us." "They do," I agreed. "And we don't let them down." As darkness fell over Meadowbrook, lights flickered on in houses up and down the street. Somewhere, a generator kicked on, its reliable hum a reminder that power could fail but backup systems could keep things running. That was my life now. Not flashy or dramatic, just steady and dependable. The HOA had tried to ban my business. Sharon Patterson had tried to destroy me. But the town had needed me more than the HOA's arbitrary rules, and in the end, the community had won. Not because of me alone, but because enough people decided that fairness and justice mattered more than one person's power trip. I finished my beer and went inside, ready for whatever tomorrow would bring. The generator business wasn't just my livelihood anymore. It was my purpose, my contribution to a community that had stood by me when it mattered most. And nobody, not even the most determined HOA president, could take that away. The reforms at Meadowbrook Hills HOA took root and flourished. Grace Morton proved to be everything Sharon wasn't: fair, transparent, and genuinely concerned about the community rather than personal power. Under her leadership, the HOA became what it was supposed to be all along: a group of neighbors working together to maintain property values and quality of life, rather than a dictatorial regime enforcing arbitrary rules. Other HOAs in the region took notice. I started getting calls from residents in other developments who were facing similar battles with power-hungry board members. I couldn't help them all directly, but I connected them with Rebecca, who had developed something of a specialty in HOA law after my case. She joked that I had given her a second career. A year after Sharon's sentencing, the Pennsylvania legislature passed new HOA reform legislation. The law established clearer guidelines for enforcement procedures, required better transparency in board decisions, and created an easier appeals process for residents. Several legislators cited my case as an example of why reform was needed. I never expected to become some kind of accidental activist. I just wanted to maintain generators and live my life. But sometimes circumstances choose you rather than the other way around. The fight with Sharon and the HOA taught me that communities are only as strong as their willingness to stand up for their members. Meadowbrook had stood up for me, and I would spend the rest of my life making sure I earned that trust. My business continued to grow steadily. Kyle proved to be a natural at generator maintenance, and I eventually made him a full partner in the company. We expanded our coverage area to include most of Butler County and parts of Allegheny County. We hired 2 more technicians, both veterans like us who appreciated steady work with clear purpose. Mrs. Henderson remained one of my favorite clients. I checked on her generator every quarter without fail, and she always had fresh cookies waiting. She told everyone at her church about how I had stood up to the HOA, and I got a dozen new clients from her congregation alone. The fire station's generator never failed, which was good because Meadowbrook was hit by 3 major storms that year. Each time, I worked with Chief Richards and his crew to keep emergency systems running throughout town. The elementary school's backup power kept kids safe during a tornado warning. The medical clinic's refrigeration never wavered during a heat wave that knocked out power for 2 days. The traffic lights at the Highway 22 intersection kept functioning during an ice storm that made roads treacherous. Every successful job was a reminder of why I had fought so hard. These weren't just generators. They were lifelines that kept communities functioning when the main power grid failed. And I was the person who made sure those lifelines were reliable. Sharon Patterson served 13 months of her sentence before being released to a halfway house. I heard through the grapevine that she moved back to Ohio after completing her probation. The house she had owned in Meadowbrook Hills sold quickly, bought by a young couple with twin toddlers who painted their front door a cheerful yellow that would have given Sharon an aneurysm. I never saw Sharon again after her sentencing, and I was fine with that. Some people leave scars, but healing means not letting those scars define you. Sharon had tried to destroy me and failed. That was enough. The community center where the initial town council meeting had taken place became a frequent stop for me. The building had 3 generators, all of which I maintained. Mayor Gomez, who had been re-elected in a landslide, made sure everyone knew that the community center's reliable backup power was thanks to my work. "You're good for business," she told me once, grinning. "Every time there's a storm and our lights stay on, people ask who maintains our systems. Then they hire you." "I don't mind the referrals," I admitted. "You earned them. Frank, what you did standing up to Sharon and that HOA, it mattered beyond just your situation. You showed people that institutions aren't supposed to serve the egos of petty tyrants. They're supposed to serve the community." I thought about that conversation often in the months that followed. Institutions serving communities rather than individuals. That was what the HOA was supposed to be, what it became again after Sharon's removal. And in a smaller way, that was what my business was too. I wasn't just making money servicing generators. I was serving the community by making sure critical systems worked when they were needed most. 2 years after the initial confrontation with Sharon, Meadowbrook held its annual 4th of July celebration. The town did it up right, with a parade down Main Street, a carnival in the park, and fireworks over the lake. I volunteered to make sure all the generators supporting the event were in perfect working order. As I walked through the carnival checking systems, I ran into Rebecca Zimmerman and her family. Her kids were begging for another ride on the Ferris wheel while her husband laughed and pulled out his wallet. "Frank," Rebecca called, waving me over. "How are the generators holding up?" "Perfect. Everything's running smooth." "Good. I'd hate for the cotton candy machine to go down." "These two would riot." She gestured at her kids who were now dragging their father toward the ride. "Rebecca, I never properly thanked you for everything you did. I couldn't have fought Sharon without you." She shook her head. "You gave me the ammunition, Frank. You kept meticulous records, you stayed professional when Sharon got nasty, and you had the courage to fight when most people would have given up. I just made sure the law was on your side. Still, thank you. You're welcome." Though honestly, representing you was one of the most satisfying cases of my career. There's something deeply gratifying about taking down a bully and a thief. As night fell and fireworks began exploding over the lake, I stood with Kyle and our other employees, watching the show. The generators hummed reliably, powering the lights and sound system and all the infrastructure that made the celebration possible. Nobody thought about the generators, which was exactly how it should be. They just worked, invisible and essential. That was my legacy, I realized. Not fame or recognition, but reliability and service. When people flipped a switch during a power outage and lights came on, they might not think about the generator or the person who maintained it. But that generator worked because I had done my job properly. Lives were made easier. Businesses stayed running. Critical systems remained functional. Sharon Patterson had tried to take that away from me because she couldn't tolerate anyone operating outside her control. But she had fundamentally misunderstood what mattered. The town didn't need the HOA's arbitrary rules. It needed generators that worked, and the person who made sure they did, in the end. The community had recognized that truth and acted on it. They had stood with me against Sharon's tyranny. They had reformed the HOA. They had supported my business not out of pity, but because I provided something genuinely valuable. As fireworks painted the sky in brilliant colors, and the crowd cheered, I felt a deep sense of contentment. My fight with the HOA had been painful and expensive, but it had also shown me something important about the place I called home. Meadowbrook wasn't perfect, but it was a community in the truest sense. When one of their own was threatened unfairly, people had stood up. When institutions failed, people had demanded reform. When a bully had wielded power unjustly, people had fought back. And now, 2 years later, life was good. My business thrived. The HOA functioned properly under fair leadership. Sharon was gone, serving the consequences of her crimes. The community had learned important lessons about standing up for what was right. I finished watching the fireworks and headed home, satisfied with a good day's work. Tomorrow, I would service generators at the nursing home and the church in Butler. Next week, I had appointments scheduled at businesses all over the county. My calendar was full for months in advance. The HOA had tried to ban my generator maintenance business. They had failed, because in the end, the town needed me more than it needed Sharon Patterson's petty tyranny. And that made all the difference.